For those of you coming in now, welcome to the K-12 Cybersecurity webinar. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Again, for those of you joining, we're excited to have you a little bit early as well. We'll start at 1 past the hour, so just about 1 minute. Also, as a reminder, this is going to be recorded, so feel free to, we'll send you a recording after. Feel free to share that with anyone of your colleagues who can't or wasn't able to attend. Okay, looks like we're ready to go. We almost need some elevator music or something to kick off, but welcome to the K-12 Cybersecurity webinar. Today, we're fortunate to hear from experienced veterans in cybersecurity. I'm Jared Nichols with PDQ.com, and I'll be helping to moderate today's discussion. Now, as we begin, we've probably seen cybersecurity recently in the headlines. It's actually even a topic today in Russia-US summit. We saw the Colonial Pipeline ransomware hack and the JBS attack. As attacks have increased globally, schools have also seen a big uptick in cyber attacks over the past year. 2020 was a crazy year for many of us and many of those in K-12 education. As a nation, we launched and shifted to remote education as a response to COVID-19. Unfortunately, publicly disclosed school cyber attacks incidents increased by 18% compared to incidents in 2019, which was likely accelerated by our shift to remote education. Many of these incidents resulted in gross losses. As you know, schools were closed, millions of dollars were stolen, and student data breaches linked to identity theft and credit fraud. So today we want to talk about that. We want to make sure that our collective knowledge, our wisdom, our experience, as well as our best tools and practices help us to strengthen our lines of defense. We know that many of you here today, you work in K-12, so we're excited to work together on this important topic. We'll hear from 4 experts to talk about their personal experiences dealing with these types of attacks and how you can best prepare to prevent an attack in your district. Thomas, if you want to go on, let me start with the introductions here. So let me first introduce Doug Levin. Doug serves as the National Director of K-12 Security Information Exchange, or K-12-6, the first nonprofit dedicated solely to helping protect schools from emerging cybersecurity risks. Doug was also recently named a K-12 influencer to follow in 2021 by EdTech Magazine. Barrett Pucius is the Director of Information Technology at Brevard Public Schools. Barrett oversees the hardware devices for the district of over 74,000 students, one of the largest in the country, and he has spent 18 years in education technology. Casey Sensnick is the CTO at Rockingham County Schools. She has spent 25 years in education, starting as an elementary school teacher. And finally, we'll have Jason Hanks with us today. In 2005, Jason started in K-12 education as a district system admin. Candidly, he was one of our first PDQ customers, and later he joined PDQ, where he has spent the last 6 years working with K-12 IT professionals across the country. Now, if we look at our agenda, you can see our agenda here. Has some exciting topics to discuss. We also want to have a few questions that we can hear from you in the audience, and we'll start with that. And then at the end, we're going to wrap up with Q&A. But if you have a question at any time, feel free to type it in the webinar Q&A. Some of those questions we may be able to address during the conversation, and then many of the questions we'll address at the end. So let's kick off with some polls. We want to get some information and feedback from you and understand your position and knowledge a little bit as well. You should see on your screen now, particularly if you're on a PC or Mac, you should see the poll start. The first question, go ahead and start answering those at your own pace. And we'll share the results collectively with the group. Has your district experienced a cybersecurity incident in the last 5 years? How prepared do you feel your district is for a cyber attack? 1 from being very unprepared to 10 being very prepared. The third question, which of the following is most challenging for you? And then fourth, how many system administrators are in your school district? Now we have about 140 right now in attendance, so we'll wait a little bit till we get a good percentage of those voted, and then share the results and see if we have any insights that we can help you with, or as we can understand and prepare for the discussion. Now I can kind of cheat a little bit and see some of the results, and we'll be ending the poll here shortly and sharing with you. But a couple themes that we're seeing, and I hope it doesn't bias the answers. We're around 70% voted so far. But we do see a bell curve around our question number 2, where between 5 to 7 is a very common answer. What I'm really surprised by, and I'm sure Doug may have some thoughts on, the first question is a higher percentage that have had experienced a cybersecurity incident last few years than I would have anticipated. Okay, I think we're about 2 minutes of the poll. Thomas, if you want to, Thomas is helping us behind scenes. If you want to wrap that up and share the results, people can have their own view and their own understanding of this. Okay, as you see the results here, 36%, so over a third of those who answered the poll did have a cybersecurity incident in the last 5 years. Now, obviously, this doesn't point to the severity of that incident, but it is a telling number on its own. We see 5 being the most common answer for number 2, and really that bell curve kind of averaging between 5 and 7, with some tails on all the way from 1, and no one feeling confident enough to say 10, which is probably the world that we'll always be in. Which is the most challenging for you? Training and awareness. And how many system admins are in your school district? 1 to 2 being the most common. So small teams have to work closely together on that. Great, thank you. Okay, we'll kick off our discussion now. Doug, if you don't mind kicking us off, I know you've collected some data insights similar to this poll that you're able to share with us today. Doug, if you can help us understand, what are the emerging cybersecurity threats facing K-12 schools and districts?
Yeah, thanks very much, Jaron. I appreciate the chance to talk about our work and about this topic. It's super important. I do want to note that there was actually a little note sent to the panelists from Maynard who suggests that maybe 2/3 of districts don't want to admit they had an incident then in looking at the poll results. And unfortunately, I'm probably going to come down a little bit on Maynard's side here on that topic. So let me talk a little bit about the work that I have been doing about the state of K-12 cybersecurity generally. I've worked in education and technology sphere for 20 some odd years since we've been connecting schools to the information superhighway. You remember that wonderful thing that we were going to offer all students and teachers in their classrooms. And a few years ago, circa 2016, I started seeing stories about school districts being compromised by cybersecurity incidents. And I went looking for data on the extent of these issues and trends and how severe they were. And quite honestly, I couldn't find anything that made any sense to me as a K-12 person. And so then since I couldn't find anything, I decided maybe I would just start to assemble a data set myself and see what patterns might emerge. And what I did is I started a catalog, a database of every publicly disclosed school cybersecurity incident affecting a public school district in the US. And I started publishing these on a map I called the K-12 Cyber Incident Map, which is something I still maintain to this day at that URL on the screen. And I catalog a variety of things about each of these incidents, but just to give you a sense of changes over time, when I first launched this map in March of 2017, there were about 100 incidents on it. Now there are well over 1,200 incidents that I have cataloged since that time. And if we go to the next slide, I've started then to write reports about what I've learned about the state of K-12 cybersecurity, doing an annual review. And this is a calendar year review. And at this point, I've written 3 reports, the most recent of which was released in about March of this year, so just a couple of months ago. This is a terrific way to get a nice summary in a PDF format of the major trends over the last year. It's something that you might find interesting, but it's also something I think that's in a format that can be shared with your leadership and with school board members, even members of the community. So if you're interested in taking a stronger stance with respect to cybersecurity in your district, and you need a piece to help convince people to take those steps, this might be something that will help you do that. It might also be something that will help you better assess the risks that you're facing as a school district. So, you can't protect yourself from everything that's out there in the wild and woolly internet. What are the things that might be most important to be concerned about? And this report will help you there. Next slide. So let me talk then a little bit about, sort of the challenges that school districts are facing. And this slide really shows 2 of the most important trends. One is on the left of your screen there. This is just a count of the number of publicly disclosed incidents. And I keep on hammering publicly disclosed because the question that this group was asked beforehand is, have you experienced an incident? And of course, people define incidents in different ways. It's always a challenge. Sometimes people think an incident is only something that involves a disclosure or breach of student data. But that's only one way to think about these incidents. And it's also, the question is, what's the threshold for an incident? Is it a user experiences an issue, or does it have to be district-wide, et cetera? And so, right now, this is more of an art than a science because there really is very weak reporting requirements in the sector. But as near as I can tell, at least from public reports, there is no question that the number of public reports has been dramatically increasing in recent years. I think that tracks the adoption of digital tools and services in schools, right? More and more of your schools are one-to-one. We're doing things like testing online, but also back office work is happening more and more online. HR management, payment systems for contracts, facilities management, physical security systems are actually usually managed digitally, right? Food service and point of sale for that, right? This is all moving digital. And as schools have adopted, this sort of, or undergone this digital transformation, if you will, maybe not as some have seen, maybe not as some have recognized, they are sort of increasing their risk profile. And as a result, we're seeing more incidents. This is, honestly very understandable, even, as Jaren introduced, major infrastructure providers, major companies with much larger budgets, much larger staff than schools are being compromised. It shouldn't be surprising that schools with their limited IT resources are also being targeted. So let me then talk a little bit about the types of incidents that we're seeing. And these are data from 2020 calendar year. So I think Jared mentioned over 400 incidents disclosed involving 377 districts or K-12 organizations. That means that a handful experienced more than one in the same calendar year. And in my data year over year, I see somewhere between 10 and 12% of incidents every year happening to districts that had previously experienced an incident. In some cases, that's just bad luck. In some cases, I'm seeing districts that may be experiencing 4, 5, 6, or 7 or more incidents over that period of time, and that maybe suggests something else is going on. It's a wide range of incidents that schools are dealing with. I think schools have been dealing with issues like denial of service attacks for many, many years, right? They may be so commonplace that they don't even get reported anymore unless they are like during a testing window, right? Or they actually shut down school operations, both of which have happened over the last calendar year. We've certainly seen lots of phishing attacks. I think these are so common that they don't get reported, except for those sort of spear phishing attacks that are going after your business office staff or superintendent, right? That result in the theft of large amounts of money. And in some cases, I've seen millions of dollars scammed out of school districts from targeted phishing attacks, where people are clearly doing research on school district operations, who your contractors are, getting in the middle of those conversations, and in many cases, finding ways to steal that money, for instance, by changing bank routing information. Ransomware, absolutely a hot topic. Schools are no exception. 2020 was a historically bad year for school districts with respect to ransomware, but in fact, 2019 was even worse in terms of the numbers of incidents. What we saw in 2020 was actually an increase in the severity of incidents. So severity in terms of the amount of money being extorted, severity in terms of the amount of days that schools were closed as a result of that, severity in terms of data being exfiltrated as part of that ransomware incident. So historically, we think of ransomware incidents as just locking you out of your data and systems, but we've seen the criminals now pivot and start to steal data and release that as well alongside the extortion demands. We saw a huge, data breaches are a huge issue facing school districts. And I'd note that's not just student data. About half of the incidents that we see affecting school districts involve employee data or staff data. And it's also important to note that when school district systems are compromised, it's not just current students or employees that are affected, but in many cases, those school information systems have historical data in them too, right? So they may be compromising 5, 10 years of data when those systems are compromised, right? Because they're all in the live system. And then finally, 2020 threw a curveball in what we consider sort of categorized as other incidents. So in my parlance, that tends to be things like website defacement, social media accounts being compromised by school districts, or a range of really other sort of niche and oddball things that happen with IT in schools, right? But 2020 brought a rise of a whole new class of incidents that many folks maybe know as Zoom bombing, but that I categorize as sort of class or meeting invasions. I like that terminology better. One, because I think people better understand the significance of that. But two, it's not just limited to the Zoom platform, and there were many other platforms that were also compromised. We also saw something that I termed email invasions. And so this is sort of the mass compromise of school district email systems, not to send out phishing links per se, but really to send out the same sort of hurtful or hateful content that we see in class and meeting invasions, right? And so, I have a little sort of COVID icon there. That is a whole new class of incidents that came to schools this last year because of COVID. So sort of big picture, we see the number of incidents growing and the sort of range diversifying and the severity increasing. Next slide. Then the last point I kind of want to make about the types and trends of incidents that we're seeing is that they don't seem to be distributed evenly across school districts. I've correlated the data that we have against the common sort of characteristics of school districts that the U.S. Department of Education collects. And we see both in terms of enrollment size and also in terms of urbanicities, right? So the more urban or suburban school districts and the larger school districts tend to be much more likely to have experienced a reported incident. That may be because they have more users and they have sort of a bigger threat profile on the internet. It may be that, there may be other things going on as well, like it may be more likely to have public reports emerge from larger school districts where there may be a bigger media presence, et cetera. I do want to be clear, though, that in this context, large is greater than 10,000 students, right? So everybody, you talk to folks in school districts and they have their own gauge for what's large and what's small, and depending on your state, right? So large is greater than 10,000 students. Medium is between 10,000 and 2,500 students. Smaller would be less than 2,500 students in your district, right? And obviously, if you look across the country, the majority of school districts in the U.S. are actually considered small, right? But the larger you are, the bigger sort of a profile you've got out on the internet, the larger a target you are. But without question, school districts from all 50 states, from the very largest to the very smallest, have experienced incidents that have been severe and significant. So maybe, Jaren, then if it's okay, I can kind of pivot, because I hate kind of presenting what seems like a scary and maybe a bad news story without then talking about like the things that we can do to make it better. Which
we'd love to get into the good stuff.
Yeah, okay, great.
Let's get into how to protect ourselves.
So I think there's kind of I think about it in two categories, right? There's things that folks can do collectively, right? That are beyond the purview of any individual IT staff person or school district, right? And then there are things that individual school districts can and should do as well, right? So like collectively, like working together, we need to make the case, right, that we need the public system to invest in greater IT security capacity, right, dedicated to the needs of schools. And I say capacity very intentionally. It's not just money, right? We need folks on the ground who understand how schools work and what schools need. There's no question that resources and money is important, right? But this is not a question where money is just going to solve the issue, that we go off and buy the widget or the silver bullet solution, and then we're going to be safe. It doesn't work like that, right? And we know security doesn't work like that. So we need to build up the capacity and infrastructure of the system to be resilient to these sorts of threats. I do think that we're going to need regulation and policy about this at the federal level, and if not at the federal level, then at the state level. And we're starting to see those conversations happen. We do need K-12 specific tools, right? And that's tools that meet the unique needs of schools, but also tools that are priced in a way that schools can afford, right? There are some great tools out there that are just totally too expensive and too complicated for schools to manage themselves. They could be a help, but they're not really designed for schools. And then finally, I think that we need to support better information sharing about what's going on in research. If we try to defend against these threats one-on-one, like everybody on their own, it's not gonna, we're not gonna be successful. The bad guys talk with each other, share tips and tactics with each other, and evolve. If we don't do that as schools, we're gonna be in rough shape. Next slide. So actually, one of the things that I'm excited about and that I've pivoted from, which is instead of just doing research on the challenges facing school districts, I've helped to launch a new organization called K-12-6, or the K-12 Security Information Exchange, which is a membership organization for K-12 organizations of all types, public and private, and charters, regional education agencies, state education agencies, to work together in a trusted fashion, in a secure fashion, to share information about threats they're facing, develop strategies and tactics to better defend themselves. So I'd love for folks to take a look at K-12-6, to consider joining this growing community of folks. We're very excited about its potential going forward. So next slide. This will be the last slide I've got, I promise you. It's important for folks also to take individual actions, right, at your school district level, right? And one of the things that we're working on at K-12-6 is actually a set of what we think are the top controls that every district should implement, right? But let me share with you some of the conversation that we're having, right? And these are sort of technical things that folks can do now that would offer demonstrable protection against the sorts of attacks that we're seeing being carried out against schools, right? So one is sort of disabling administrative rights for users and end user devices where you can, wherever possible. I know it's an inconvenience. Folks want to install printer drivers, install other software that they're randomly downloading off the internet. It is absolutely a challenge, though, in terms of protecting your district. To the extent that you lock down those devices, you're going to be better protected. Secondly, turning off services and ports that you have that are internet facing, right? If it doesn't need to be internet facing, right, turn it off or put it behind some protection, a VPN, an MFA-based login, right? But RDP, open RDP to the internet, which many people have relied on at a time of remote learning, has absolutely been exploited by threat actors. The FBI even issued an alert to school districts specifically about turning off RDP exposed to the internet. Please do that. Keeping up to date with your patching, super important, right? Some of the larger compromises that have happened over the last year, once we start to hear the details about what's happened, it turns out that known vulnerabilities could have been it could have been dealt with if they had just kept up to date with their patching. User authentication, big deal, big issue, passwords, I mean, there's lots of advice that is floating around about how you manage user authentication and passwords. Getting people onto single sign-on helps, particularly then if you can get it behind MFA, right? If you can MFA all the things, MFA all the things. If you can MFA only some of the things, MFA those things, whatever you can, right? But certainly focus on your most critical users, your most critical systems first, right? Don't let perfect be the enemy of better, right? Start going down that path. And in fact, we've seen cyber insurance companies starting to require school districts to implement this as a condition of them writing policies. And then, when things go sideways, right, immutable backups are going to save your bacon, right? Having an immutable is really important, right? Cloud-based backups are important. They're good. They're easy to implement, right, in some respects. But having that offline backup that the ransomware actors can't get to is, at the end of the day, the best backstop that you can have in place. And obviously, again, it would be better if you had longer term backups, going back 6, 12 weeks, 18 weeks, 6 months, a year, but anything is better than nothing, right? So again, don't let perfect be the enemy of better. And the goal, I think, for all of us is to get better day by day. So these would be the top ones that I would suggest, but I know that others, I'm sure, have other insights as well. So Jaron, that's how I would sort of kick us off and start us.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Doug. And we really appreciate your research here as well as your best practices. One question we did have from the audience before we hear a few of the stories from starting with Barrett. Any favorite MFA devices, and I'll open that to any of the panelists, or any best practices that we want to share around MFA?
I found that the best device for our district is going to be cell phones. Everyone seems to have one. For those that don't, we're looking at FIDO2 keys. They're fairly inexpensive, but still, with a district our size, they're expensive. About $50 a piece, 9,000, 10,000 users. So we're going to encourage them to use a cell phone because it's very convenient. Push notifications, it enables passwordless authentication in some instances. But for those who refuse to use a cell phone.
Great.
And I would certainly concur with what I've essentially heard what Barrett had suggested as well. I would say that there may be some more inexpensive USB devices out there if you're willing to look at some open source solutions.
Our insurance company will not let us look at open source solutions.
Well, let's hear a little bit more about your experience then, Barrett. I know that your district experienced a cyber attack on what was probably already the scariest day of the year. I think it was Halloween, correct me, but can you tell us a little bit about that incident and maybe highlight a few things that you've learned?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, we were unfortunately the victim of an incident. We got a call on, it was, if you remember this past year, Halloween was a Friday night. Uh, my team and I like to unwind on the weekends. We got a call about 10 p.m. on October 31st. So I'm sitting out front giving out candy, got the music going, having a good time. My phone rings. God, I don't know what this is. They leave a message. It's someone from Microsoft's Dart team. They noticed something in the logs and analytics that they collect regularly throughout their other systems, that there's patterns that they see that look like we're in the midst of a ransomware attack. They haven't started the ransom, but they called it a pre-ransomware. So we woke the team up, got everyone on board, and started shutting things down. Engaged them for a week, and they evicted them and all that. But it was extremely intense. And the survey in the beginning was really interesting because a lot of people feel that they're between a 4 and a 6 ready. And if you would have asked me on October 30th where I was, I would have probably said the same thing. But once it starts, it's like getting on a roller coaster. You're not getting off until the thing's over. The insurance, our cyber insurance company did engage and brought in a cyber forensics firm, and they searched everything, found the exact point of entry, the exact time that the person was in our network. They'd come in about a month earlier, about 40 days earlier, and had been in our network for 40 days. Some of the things we learned were we just didn't know anything about what the attacks look like. You know, you read about a ransomware attack, you're like, oh, they get in, they try to get your backups. So if you have immutable backups, you're safe. And then they encrypt everything over the weekend and you come into a red screen asking for money. There's a lot more to it than that. The cyber people called it the kill chain. And you know, we had no idea. So they get in the network through a simple phishing, they compromise one computer, they figure out who that person communicates with and how they communicate. And then they start getting more and more users. In our instance, they deployed a really, really pesky coin miner that we started seeing pop up. It kind of flooded our alerts and our dashboards with all this coin miner garbage. And then these other smaller things like an LDAP query against all users, that kind of fell to the wayside. So it was pretty intense. The lesson learned was just, we need to know as district administrators and sysadmins, we need to understand the process the bad guys are going through so that we can better recognize it. You know, backups are great, but one of the other things they're doing, as you mentioned, they're finding data and selling it. So if they get into your finance systems, they'll sell that. If they can get into your student systems, they'll sell that. So you have to protect the data up front. You have to know where your data lives and who's got access to it. And if that person was compromised, you've got to start looking at what was accessed during the compromise, so you can, you know, make decisions then.
Fair question on that, on maybe the intensity there. You know, now that you're past it, has there been any kind of understanding of the financial or man-hour impact that happened from this incident?
It was very impactful on man hours. The financial piece, the insurance covered it, thank God. But we wouldn't have been able to afford it otherwise. We're a large district. We have $1 million policy, almost maxed it out. So very expensive. And we caught them early. Like, they didn't actually encrypt anything. We just caught them on our network hunting around and got them off that way. In fact, later in the year, we got a call again late at night that there was hands on keyboard trying to break back in as we were in the middle of evicting them. So it was like, I don't know, 11:30, 12 o'clock at night on a Friday night, you know, catching us when we're asleep or in no condition to be, you know, doing IT work at the very least, and trying to, you know, just gain their grasp on our network. Man hours wise, it was all of them. I have a team of 10 network administrators, and I'm fortunate enough, I noticed a lot of people are very small districts. We've got about 87 site-based sysadmins. It was all of us. My network team, it was 24/7 for a couple of weeks, and then we're still working on it. And the impact to our users has been extreme. We had to, well, we didn't have to, but we did. We increased our password requirements significantly. We forced a global password reset. I didn't even know what a Kerberos, the KRGBT key was until this incident happened, and we had to, you know, reset that thing a dozen times throughout different parts of the eviction and cleaning phase. So it was a very, very high impact, not just in dollars. Thankfully, our insurance company covered us, and the dollars out of pocket were fairly small. But the hours we put into it, the things that we had to side burner to get this going was absolutely insane.
Thanks. We actually have a question from David. Any way that you can roughly break down what were the costs that used up the $1 million policy if it wasn't for the ransom?
Sure. The Dart team is very expensive. That comes through a Premier contract with Microsoft. If anybody works with Premier, you know, nothing's cheap there. And then the cyber forensics company was extremely in depth. Well, I guess the first thing that I should mention is your insurance company hires you a lawyer or a law firm, engages a law firm that specializes in cyber. The law firm then engages all of these other third parties so that everything that happens is client attorney privilege. It's not subject to public records until everything's done. Once it's done, it's subject to public records, but at that point, public record is public record. But so yeah, the law firm took up some money. The investigation took up a good amount of money. They also deployed carbon black sensors for about 45 days and had something called Red Canary, which is an automation product. It was extremely intense. It wrecked our system performance. And I just kept telling everyone, like, just get through December. We'll get these things clean. Once this company gives us the all clear, we're good, but we're going to suffer with bad performance. All the data it was sending back to the cloud for analysis pegged our network. We run 20 gigs out to the internet. We typically run 14 at our peak, and we were flatlined at 20 all day, every day, while these things were running. The other cost was we found some accounts had been previously compromised and they contained sensitive data. So there was a cost to analyze that data, to delineate what we had to report on, what we didn't, and then to send those mailings home. And we are also providing identity theft monitoring for the people who had a social security number. We don't believe anything was exposed, but the fact that it was potentially exposed, we want to keep everything on the up and up and provide that. So we are close to the $1 million limit. It just finished up. We just finished our notification piece, and we believe there's going to be a couple more administrative things from the law firm, but we think the roller coaster ride is finally coming to an end.
Thanks. A couple questions that might be combined here is, you mentioned that October 30th, you would add a higher degree of confidence there. Anything, if you could go back, anything that you would tell yourself, or anything you should have been aware of, that if you could give your advice pre the maybe even the 40 days before the actual attack occurred? And specifically, we have one that, what are any recommendations for 0 days protection on Windows services?
Yeah, so there's some things that I would have done differently for sure going back. When a user gets phished, as a sysadmin, and I've been at this for a while, I'm kind of hard, and I'm like, it's a list of people who need more training, a bunch of idiots, they got phished, whatever, to reset their password, and let's move on. You need to take those more seriously. You need to see what was going on in their account while their account was compromised. Pull your audit logs. If you're using Office 365 or Google, you can pull those and see what the attacker was actually doing while they were on. It's so important. The phishing seems to be the main doorway for the most severe attacks. And if you think about it, phishing is the thing that we as sysadmins and district leaders and school leaders, we can't control that aspect. We can control the hardness of our firewall. We can disable ports. We can do all of those things, but we can't control what a user is going to click on and not click on ultimately. And the people creating these spear phishing attacks will learn to circumvent your system. They have forever. I've been in this industry for 18 years, and I've just seen, phishing and spamming has been a thing that there's never going to be a way to completely get rid of that. So that's the one thing. I would take every phishing attack extremely seriously and run the analytics through to the end.
Great, appreciate that, Barrett. Appreciate your viewpoints here, as well as your sharing your experience. Casey, we would love to hear from you as well. Can you tell us about the cyber incident you had in your district?
Sure, thank you for having me. Our cyber attack happened right before the Christmas holiday in 2017. Our staff and students were less than a week from going home for the Christmas break, And we noticed that a few of our machines at our central office were just not acting right. They were slowing down. They were not functioning the way we normally would. We just assumed, old material, maybe a bad machine. We'll go up, we'll re-image them, we'll get them back on the network. Everything will be fine. We went, we re-imaged them. They looked fine, put them back on the network. Within the next morning, they were calling us back. Something wasn't right. So we started to do a deeper dive and noticed that there was all these files being dumped onto the machines. And at the time, we had no thought that it was malware. We just, we're still back on equipment or user. And we took a Friday night and tore our central office apart. Basically, we investigated every single log that the machines had on them, all the files, all the processes that were being run in the background. We wiped them clean and did all these different pieces over the weekend. We worked basically the entire weekend with just a couple hours of sleep each night so that we'd be ready come Monday morning. Felt very confident we were good to go. By midday Monday, not only was our central office reporting issues, some of our other schools were. And at that point, we knew something else was going on. As mentioned from Barrett, we reached out to some companies to help us determine what our issue was. And through this investigative process, we learned that we had the Emotet infection. And if you're not familiar with what that is, Emotet comes through an infected email. It's usually an attachment. We were able to find what we call our patient 0. It was an infected attachment called incorrect invoice. It was sent to 5 different folks that downloaded and opened it. Conveniently, all those folks were people that worked with invoicing. So they just assumed that it was a legitimate email. It doesn't really get detected by most software at the time. It was relatively new. And what it allows the bad guys, the operatives to do is to install banking Trojans, try to collect your banking information, put in ransomware and those pieces. We were very fortunate in the sense that our firewall knocked down the ransom communication. Otherwise, we'd have had ransomware on top of our entire process. But what we found was that we didn't know where all the Emotet had gone because of the different delays and the way it had responded. And the group that we had worked with, everybody felt like there could be some dormant pieces of software laying around. And what we decided to do was take it all down. And so over the Christmas holiday, 2 days before staff left the building, they were instructed not to take anything home that had the word technology with it. If you could type on it, use it, install things, it had to be left at the school. And we started running van loads. We had about 1,200 laptops and we ran school to school to school all through the middle of the nights, picking up devices so that we could start what we thought would be this simple re-image, get them back out, wipe everything clean. Like I said, we had hired a company and I'm happy to share that their name was Prologic out of Georgia. They were phenomenal. They sent in a team. We had one network engineer and then I had my technicians to come in and kind of help us go through this. Well, we discovered that our machines were an older machine and it had just pretty much killed them. Our network was completely offline, and because we had backups, but nobody could tell us if the dormant piece of software would live in a backup, we chose to redo everything. So we started like we were building a building and a brand new network from scratch. We worked in our staff for 42 straight days. That included Christmas and New Year's. And most of those were 12 to 18 hour shifts. You basically went home to sleep to come back. I will say that our district was very supportive. Before they went out on Christmas break, they had sent us cards and food and all kinds of things that, over the holiday, they were sending us things to keep working. We're very proud of what we did because we were able to have the network back up in 2 weeks. So when our students returned to school and the Chromebooks, of course, were available, they were able to go back to instruction. They had critical systems back online. The phones were back online. The internet was back online. But we had a lot of work to do over those, remaining 30 plus or so days. We did not have cyber insurance, and our cost was about $1.2 million. A piece of that was for our laptops. We decided that because of the age of the laptops and their inability to really take the new image and function properly, that it was best just to go ahead and replace them. That was 6 months ahead of our planned timeline. It was going to be on the upcoming fiscal year. So we we used fund balance to do that. And then we worked with the company that came in, and the company that helped us also gave us loaners, so we could get critical folks back up and running instantly when they came back from that 2 weeks. We had the deliveries of loaners at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I've said this story before. I wanted to finally be the parent that said, why don't we go to Universal Studios for Christmas? You know, that was going to be our Christmas vacation. So needless to say, my kids not only did not have Christmas, it wasn't in Florida. And luckily they were older, so they had their understanding. And I've often said it'll be the Christmas they'll never forget. So they even came in and helped a little bit during it. We were part of the FBI's first school case. So we were able to share and be part of that. And on February 1st of 2021, the FBI's were able to finally disarm the Emotet malware totally. So we're very excited that that has happened. We hope that they'll bring those folks back to the United States for trial. We've heard that if that does happen, potentially it could be in North Carolina. I would love to get on the stand and have a conversation of, you know, what it did to us, maybe recoup some of that money. You know, it's hard, and you think about the time and the challenges and the overwhelmingness and everything. And I want to throw a couple props out. And Doug is like one of my heroes, and he knows this, we've talked about before. When I had to present to the board, you know, we're rural America. This doesn't happen here. You know, it had to be our fault. And I pulled up that cybersecurity map, said we are number 284 on the map. You know, there are 283 people that have publicly said they have had it. And we knew 2 other districts that he's never reported because they didn't publicly admit it. And so it was so great. So I encourage anybody, you know, out there to take advantage of his resources, because I can't tell you how many times I print his documents and hand them to my board members, just to remind them of why they let me hire a new engineer, why we put up a brand new network core infrastructure, why we have backups from the day after our network got back up still to this day. So if you're Google EDU, you take advantage of Google Drive and you throw up I have terabytes of backups. So now if we need to go back 6 days ago, 60 days ago, or, you know, whatever, we have that available. So as dramatic as it's been and as hard as it was, the positives that have come out it far exceeded. And I listened to what Barrett said, and our vendor that helped us said, Casey, for your first 30 days, your hair is going to be on fire. You're not going to know which way to go, where to turn. And, you know, the next 90 days, it's going to be hectic, but, you know, you'll feel like you're breathing a little bit. And he said, you probably won't sleep for the next 6 or so months, but eventually things will kind of level off and it'll be okay. And our personnel provider for our endpoint security, we called them when this happened and they said, you didn't pay for this service. And it was the most devastating thing. So my other prop that I need to throw out there is to Malwarebytes, because we had used their free version off and on throughout the years. And I called them and said, this is what's happened to us. And they said, let us help you for free. We'll worry about if you want our service afterwards, but let us be there for you. And at midnight, I'm talking to the malware reps, you know, helping us. And between them and the company we had, we were so relieved. So I would never throw under the bus who we had previously. I mean, that would be an offline discussion, but those 2 groups, you know, Doug's information and then Malwarebytes and ProLogic came through and really helped us get through something with such a small staff.
Great. Thank you, Casey. And I can only imagine kind of the course that you've been in even since the attack. One quick follow-up question on that. You've had a few years now, and hopefully you're sleeping better. And to your point, hopefully we see a trial in North Carolina as well.
Yeah.
Today, if you think and you kind of assess the state of your cybersecurity, what is the most challenging aspect, in your opinion, of managing cybersecurity in your school district?
For us pre-attack, we didn't realize we didn't have enough staff. That, you know, we thought an endpoint solution was enough, and that we were, you know, we had it down. We had never had any cause to be alarmed before. Doug pointed it out in his presentation about taking away admin rights. And that's the first thing we did. And it's a non-negotiable and has been ever since. Not that we won't let you install something, but you'll put in a work order, get approval, and a technician will do it for you. So, you know, that's kind of the challenge, is balancing out curriculum and teachers. And having been a teacher and has a husband that's a teacher, I understand I need it now because this is the lesson of the century, but I also, from this point of view, can now say, you can do the lesson of the century in 2 weeks. Just let us know and let us see what we can do to help you install what you need to be able to do that lesson. And so that's, I think, where the biggest challenge are. There's always going to be funding and getting people to understand, but it's the little minutiae of the things that you can kind of work through. And I will throw out there, because of this, we went with a group called eCentire, that was something we never considered before, and they monitor all of our traffic before it even comes in and out of our network. So besides just endpoints and that, we've added multiple layers of security. And I would say to districts that haven't experienced anything yet, and like in our case, sometimes you have to drive headfirst into the brick wall, crash, and then everybody understands, and you get those things. And it's unfortunate that it has to be that way, but when you have to prioritize budgeting needs and what's important. But hopefully by sharing what we've had happen to us, maybe that'll help other districts, be a little bit more proactive, have those things in place prior to, as opposed to having to wait until post.
Perfect, thanks. And I actually had a moment to talk with Barrett earlier in the week, and I think he echoed the same thought of taking admin rights away from all of his users was what helps him sleep better at night.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you, appreciate it. We're gonna move on to Jason. So patching is the #1 recommendation by Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency to prepare for a likely attack. Jason, you've had a lot of years experience in this. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your experience with patch management and why it's such a critical component of cybersecurity.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so I actually came up alongside Barrett back in the day, and cybersecurity was not as big of an issue back then, or as prevalent in our eyes, but it was still there. We always had attacks and things like that. But I think for us coming up back then, it was more about is Reader Rabbit going to run on all the kindergarten machines so the teachers don't yell at us? And making sure that Java's up to date in the lab so that this application can run. And the district just bought this new reading program and we have to get all this installed, or testing software. So it was always a hassle, always trying to do something not manually, not touching every single machine. Even back in the day, we used to take and build an image of a certain type of model with just the operating system, everything, patch it, get it 100%, go down this checklist that you're checking, and then you get done and you'd re-image it. And by the time you were ready to implement it and put it out there, 3 applications were already out of date. It's just, that was the way of the world. So yeah, it is super important to keep everything patched, not only just for, efficiency of your systems and everything else, but just all the 0-day exploits that come out nonstop and everything.
Great. And how has that changed, or how do you recommend that best practices, or some of the people you've seen across the country, how do they do that to make sure they're up to date? I hope they're no longer going from classroom to classroom.
Yeah. No, I mean, I talk to people all day long, and there are people that are still doing it manually. There's still people that are building these things out. They get new computers. I mean, COVID was a big swing, and everybody had to buy all these laptops and devices and get them out in people's hands. And they were doing it manually, going down the checklist. And I just can't imagine it. I can't imagine, because that was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we were doing that same process. So there are a lot of different products out there that will do that kind of patching and pushing out software and things like that. I'm trying not to pitch, I'm a little biased, right? But yeah, though it's important to have those systems in place that you can automate and keep everything up to date all the time.
Great, appreciate that. Barrett, Casey, Doug, Jason, any comments before we move into Q&A as you reflect on the stories that we've heard so far?
Nope.
Okay. We have a couple questions that we want to and encourage the audience to continue to submit them as they see. First one is, do you think, and broadly speaking, I know Barrett spoke to this a little bit, but do you think there is more leaders and districts can do to mitigate the chances of users falling for phishing?
There are some programs out there. The state of North Carolina entered the KnowBe4 software, and there are other softwares like that we now can use to practice with our staff. and it, they get sent this test email, and if they fall for it, it explains to them what they did and what to look for on the next attempt. If you're going to do something like that, you probably need the staff to kind of know in a way without telling them it's coming, so they don't feel like you're trying to target them. So in our case, that's pretty easy. We've experienced it. This is just follow-up, training, but there are some ways that you can, kind of practice before it actually happens to help train the staff without that physical one-to-one type of instruction.
Yeah, I'll echo that. The phishing campaigns, they actually have them built into Office 365 too if you're a Microsoft customer. I think it's an E3 license, it may be the A1, but you can launch phishing campaigns with malware attached, with a link attached, asking them for credentials, credential harvest, and it'll report on it. And you can see how you stack up against other people that run those same campaigns as far as compromise rate.
I will say though that as effective as these tools are in reducing the number of folks who click, they won't get you to zero and keep you at zero, right? And so you do need to think about a belt and suspenders approach. And I think, raising awareness and training is super important. But I think you need to think about, well, what happens if somebody does click something? How am I going to know? How can I, if it installs something, like, can it install something? How, can I stop it spread across the network? How quickly can I get alerted that something is going wrong and sort of automatically shut it down? So, so you have time to investigate. So it is a belt and suspenders approach. I think, the training stuff works really well. And I think awareness and, users are the big challenge in all of this. So I'm definitely for that training, but don't think of it as like the one and done control. If you just train, then you're good. And because I'll tell you, you're never going to get to 100%. You're never going to get to 100%. There's always going to be somebody who clicks. And I will tell you that those emails that they're being sent are also getting to be super sophisticated. People are doing research on your districts. They are standing up websites that are spoofed to look exactly like your district. We've heard reports of school district users being compromised, not from your district, from a different district being used to launch the phish, right? So from trusted outsiders who are phishing, your users from compromised credentials. So it's tough out there. I mean, so always think about layer protections.
Great, thank you. Next question, any insights or tips or any advice on cybersecurity insurance? I think we've had two examples here, one where it saved the day and the other one where it may not have been applicable at the time.
I could say that we go through carrier. Our risk management department handles that because we're a good sized district, so we don't do it independently. This year, our deductible went up tenfold. So we reached out to other districts in our area and said, hey, are you guys seeing this? Who are you using? Everyone's using the same company. Everyone's deductible went up. Everyone's cost went up. And everyone's just paying it. They have a captive audience in education right now.
I would say this is a case where it depends on what state you're in, right? So some states have statewide pools that school districts can participate in. In other cases, yeah, individual districts are out on the market themselves. So the first place I'd start is your general liability carrier to see if they offer a cyber policy. You need to look carefully to see what it covers and what it doesn't, because I think, as Barrett suggested, prices are skyrocketing because it turns out that folks have not been pricing cyber insurance correctly, right? So as you might imagine, I imagine, Barrett, your premiums didn't get anywhere close to what you got out of it in returns. Probably the same for you, Casey, right? So as a result, right, two things are happening. One is the premium is going up, but they're also making it harder for districts to get that insurance and qualify for it, either by having exclusions for what they'll pay for, right? So they may fight you and say, oh, this isn't included, or they're going to require you have certain controls in place, like multi-factor authentication, before they will even issue the policy. And so we actually have just recently done some research on this. It is happening to school districts, but actually to organizations of all types in the private sector as well. Everybody's getting hammered. Insurance companies are taking a bath on this. Everybody is trying to figure out how to get to be in a better place. But check with your general policy holder or look for brokers who may be able to help you.
We determined in the end the cost to pay for the insurance and all the exclusions that and all the rules, and if you did this and if you did that, that in the end, fund balance to cover is a better option than insurance, until the insurance companies can come up with a way where, you know, if it came and your employee opened it and it was a phishing email, we're not going to cover that because you should have known better, kind of these little mini clauses that are written in there. And we were not happy with the insurance providers that gave us opportunities going forward. And so we have just opted to invest our money in more robust platforms and, you know, things that districts wouldn't normally. eSentire is not an education program. It's for, you know, big corporate, and it has a price tag of that. But in the end, I think we're getting more bang from our buck than the possibility of having an insurance provider that won't cover our specific attack. And our board is in agreement with that at this time. That could change any day, but that is where our current stance is, just based on our past experience and not having insurance.
I would say the biggest benefit for us having insurance was that they knew what to do. They knew who to call. If it was just on me, when that stuff went down, if we didn't have them engaging that law firm that knew the people, knew the players, knew what we were supposed to do, I have no idea what we would have done.
Yeah, I want to echo what Casey said. It's really important that the board is engaged in conversations about risk management, right? I mean, that's one of the functions of a board. And so they worry about physical security issues, about like extreme weather events. They need to be engaged around cyber risks as well, and sort of help the district make a decision about where the money is best spent and what the priorities are. So I applaud you for that, Casey. That's tough work.
Great, thanks. Looks like we have about time for one more question, and then we'll wrap up. And just as a reminder, thank you for all of you who have asked questions, who participated. We'll be sending out the webinar as well as the polling questions and the presentation materials. This one looks like it's Jason. I think it might be a follow-up to yours, but I'd love Barrett if you have, or Casey, you have it, an answer here. But what are your recommendations for handling software deployment or keeping your computers up to date?
I know Jason's not supposed to tout a certain company, but I don't think there's anything saying I can't. PDQ has been a godsend for us for keeping software and runtimes up to date, keeping software deployed. We can have a consistent deployment. We just start with a bare image, and then PDQ, we've set up a series of tasks, or site techs do, and it just runs when it sees the heartbeat and everything. Every computer is going to look the same. Then we have a solid baseline. I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're running a big district, having a baseline like that lets you better pick out anomalies. And when you come up against something, or you find a 0-day, or you have something that needs to be changed, you can deploy that out identically to 70,000 computers just as quickly as you could to 10.
And I don't want to follow up with that, just from experience too. You know, being in that same school district and having that set up and all that automation. Once you have that automation set up and it's set it and forget it, you then have time to help the teachers learn and educate them on all the other things, balance all the different things that are attacking you and coming in all these different directions. It's not just a one-sided thing here.
Right, you can do the important stuff. If you let the computers work for you, don't do it the other way around.
Yep.
Thanks. Casey, anything you would add?
I would just concur. It's given, now that I have 2 network engineers, an opportunity when you get that 0-day, do it now, must be put out patch, to not be thinking about how do we go physically touch all these machines all over the place. It gives you a little more ability to breathe, because you know that automation and those capabilities are there for you.
All right. Thank you. Barrett, Casey, Doug, Jason, we appreciate your time, your preparation, sharing your collective wisdom and thoughts. We hope that we can, as Doug kind of pointed out, the more that we share our information with one another, the more we'll make their education, K-12, and system administration safer. Thank you all for attending, and have a great Wednesday.
Thank you.